To a lot of people, sex and college go hand in hand. On college campuses nowadays, a culture of sexual promiscuity has emerged, marked by short skirts, random hookups, and no strings attached. But what is a hookup, really? What makes someone promiscuous? Merriam-Webster's online definition of promiscuous tells us that promiscuity involves sexual behavior with various people. But in reality, everyone has their own definition.
So there's something about not having values and being careless that I think is usually connected to how people talk about it.
I think a part of it comes from like the way that you dress.
Not making people work for it.
It would be simply using people for sexual purposes rather than the sexual act coming out of a deep love.
Have sex with anybody.
Have sex with multiple people.
I think it's really gray.
It's someone having sexual relations without having a solid personal relationship.
Someone being overtly sexual.
And if there's a girl making out with a guy at a frat, you kind of call that promiscuous.
Each week it's someone different.
People having sex with each other out of marriage.
Probably about half.
More than 60, but less than 80.
About 20%. What percent are in sororities and fraternities?
I would guess like at least 50.
45%.
Yeah. I'd go with 80.
Yeah.
25%.
While the percentage of students engaging in sex has decreased from 72.3% to 70.8% over the past 10 years, the number of partners per person has increased from 1.97 to 2.12. So there's less people having sex, but those who are have more partners. Is this an increase in promiscuity among students? But we have to keep in mind that student perception is much different than actual behavior. In other words, we think our classmates are a lot more promiscuous than they really are. Again, this depends on how we define promiscuity. As Columbia University's Q&A resource pointed out, students say that being sexually active can mean anything from foreplay or sexual intercourse to passionate kissing. But our behavior has to be more promiscuous than our parents' and grandparents' behavior, right?
Grandparents, absolutely not.
Yeah. But anyone older than parents, I really don't think so.
Our parents and that generation had the same desires that we have now.
They had Woodstock, didn't they?
No, my grandpa does not get it. He was like, you know, back in my day, you used to like go up, give a guy a $5 bill, and he'd give you a little nudie video, and go back, and on the camera there would be some guy and a girl, and they'd be making out a little bit. You get that on TV now.
In the 60s and early 70s, sexual freedom was a real cause, and there were people who were, by any definition, very sexually promiscuous then.
I remember, again, my mother describing Penn State as that den of iniquity. She really didn't want me to go to Penn State because from what she had heard, people were a little loose, shall we say.
It's always going to be a part of college life. I think it may have been in the 50s, but it wasn't talked about the same way. So I think promiscuity may not be any different as it happens, but I think it may have more awareness, or maybe may have a different role in people's dialogue now.
Undoubtedly, the acceptability of certain behaviors has changed over time, but that doesn't mean those behaviors didn't always exist. Throughout the 1950s, women that engaged in premarital sex were considered bad girls. However, in 1953, Dr. Alfred Kinsey noted that 27% of female students were still sexually active. Another study showed that this number increased to 43% in 1967, and by 1975, the peak of the sexual revolution, Ohio State found that this number rose to 80%. As the numbers rose, so did the acceptability of sexual freedom. In 1983, a study found that 58% of those surveyed thought premarital sex was acceptable in serious relationships. The sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s resulted from a combination of the first co-ed dorms, a desire to rebel from strict expectations of previous decades, and a rise in the average marriage age. However, in many cases, this new sexual freedom was matched by renewed sexual conservatism. In other words, openness about sexuality was here to stay, but that didn't mean it was any less controversial.
It's definitely like more okay to be more sexual now.
Yeah.
My impression is that it's socially acceptable to be promiscuous.
It's just become a lot more acceptable.
It may be more socially acceptable to be promiscuous these days, but that doesn't mean it's been accepted by all of society. Instances of disapproval are prevalent in the media, which just goes to show that not everyone is accepting of the hookup culture seen in colleges today.
No. Sex is part of nature. I go along with nature.
If you have an increase in, sex crimes or date rape type situations, I think alcohol-related sex can be somewhat problematic.
I wouldn't want to be like that, but as long as the people that are like that are being safe about it and not getting pregnant, then that's on them.
Their sense of enjoyment is coming from almost something that is life-threatening rather than life-enhancing.
It can be dangerous.
If it's the kind of situation where the person wakes up the next morning and is like, that was fun, and they're good with it, and they don't feel anxious about it, I think that seems like a perfectly good thing to do.
Some people might even think that it's that they need to be that way in order to be accepted by a cultural group or to be, cool.
It's a really bad thing because it damages.
You abuse the emotions.
Yeah, you abuse the emotions, so that by the time you get married and you're fully committed to this person, it's not the same.
I think people who are promiscuous risk possibly having a more shallow life as they mature, because to use and dismiss people over and over again, I think could be very, very confusing.
So is promiscuity a problem? There isn't a consensus, and it's unlikely that there ever will be. Promiscuity among college students is nothing new. Your parents and even your grandparents saw it. But even though it happened, it wasn't talked about as freely as it is today. Although society is more open to it now, promiscuity still carries a stigma for many people. No matter how the issue evolves, sexual behavior in college will always be a controversial topic. What we have to remember is that our perceptions are not always right. Because it's more socially acceptable to be promiscuous, it's assumed that more people are promiscuous, which isn't necessarily true. The hookup culture might be marked by booty shorts, miniskirts, and 4-inch heels, but that doesn't mean everyone wearing those things is hooking up. If our generation's perception is so skewed, how will promiscuity be seen in the future?